Listen, I have seen some weird stuff in my 47 years of bounty hunting across the galaxy. Witnessed civilizations rise and fall, tracked down criminals who could bend space with their minds, and once even helped a sentient gas cloud find its missing pet asteroid. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I witnessed on that backwater planet called Earth in the year 2087, that the name's Korik Voss, by the way. Half human, half Centaurian, and completely fed up with the universe's twisted sense of humor. I was tracking down a time travel fugitive when I stumbled into the most bizarre case of temporal interference I'd ever encountered. And trust me, that's saying something in this business that IT started when I picked up an anomalous temporal signature in the suburbs of New Denver. My scanner was going absolutely crazy, beeping like a deranged metal detector at a jewelry store. The readings were unlike anything I'd seen before, bouncing between past and present like a cosmic ping-pong ball having an existential crisis. The source led me to a quiet residential street where nothing seemed out of place. Well, except for the fact that my temporal scanner was practically vibrating itself to pieces. House after house of perfectly normal human families, living their perfectly boring human lives. Kids playing in yards, parents mowing lawns, the whole nauseating display of domestic bliss. Then I spotted him, an old man, probably in his 70s, moving into the house next door to a family with a young boy. Nothing unusual about that, right? Wrong. My scanner nearly exploded when I got within 50 feet of the guy. This wasn't just any old man. This was a walking, talking temporal anomaly wrapped in a cardigan sweater and sensible shoes. The kid next door couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Skinny little thing with messy brown hair and curious eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His name was Tommy Mitchell, according to the mailbox. The old man called himself Harold Winters, though something about that name felt as fake as a Regellian diplomat smile that I decided to set up surveillance from the abandoned house across the street. Don't ask me how I managed to squat in someone else's property without getting arrested. Let's just say bounty hunters have their ways, and leave it at that. What I witnessed over the next few weeks would make even the most seasoned time travel investigators question their sanity. Harold wasn't just any neighbor. He was watching Tommy with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. But it wasn't the creepy kind of watching that would make you call the authorities. It was something else entirely. Something that made my chest tighten with an emotion I didn't want to acknowledge. Love. Pure, unadulterated love mixed with the kind of heartbreak that could shatter entire solar systems. Harold would sit on his porch every morning, timing it perfectly so he could wave to Tommy as the boy walked to school. The kid would wave back enthusiastically, probably thinking he'd made a new friend. If only he knew the truth. During my 3rd week of observation, I witnessed something that made my blood run cold. Tommy was playing in his backyard when he tripped and scraped his knee pretty badly. The kid was crying, blood streaming down his leg, and his parents were nowhere to be seen. That's when Harold appeared like some kind of guardian angel. The old man rushed over with a first aid kit that looked suspiciously well prepared. But here's the thing that made my temporal scanner go berserk. Harold knew exactly what to do. Not just basic first aid knowledge, but specific knowledge. He knew Tommy was allergic to standard adhesive bandages and would need the hypoallergenic ones. He knew the kid's favorite cartoon character to distract him from the pain. He even knew that Tommy's left knee had been broken when he was 5 and would ache whenever it rained. How does a stranger know these things? Simple answer. He doesn't. I watched Harold's face as he tended to the boy's wound, and what I saw there nearly broke my cynical bounty hunter heart. This wasn't a stranger helping a neighbor kid. This was someone reliving a memory that was simultaneously precious and devastating. The old man's hands were shaking as he applied the bandage, and I could see tears forming in his eyes. Tommy, bless his innocent little heart, was chattering away about school and his friends and his latest obsession with space rockets. Harold hung on every word like it was the most important conversation in the universe, because I was beginning to realize it probably was that night I broke into Harold's house. Yeah, I know, not exactly legal. Desperate times call for desperate measures. What I found inside confirmed my worst suspicions and opened up a whole new level of cosmic horror. The place was a shrine to Tommy Mitchell's childhood. Not in a creepy stalker way, but in the way someone might preserve a memory of something infinitely precious that they'd lost forever. There were photographs everywhere, but not recent ones. These were old, faded pictures of Tommy at various ages, all the way up to adulthood. Wedding photos, graduation pictures, family gatherings, grandchildren bouncing on his knee. But here's where it got really weird. In every single photo, Tommy looked exactly like Harold. Same eyes, same smile, same stubborn cowlick that refused to behave no matter how much hair gel you used. The resemblance wasn't just striking. It was identical. I found a journal hidden in Harold's bedroom, written in shaky handwriting that looked like it belonged to someone running out of time. The entries were heartbreaking and terrifying in equal measure. Day 12 of being back in 2087. Tommy asked me today if I had any grandchildren. I almost told him the truth. Almost said, yes, and they look just like you did at their age. But I can't. I can't burden him with the knowledge of what's to come. Watch him build a rocket ship out of cardboard boxes today. I remember doing the same thing at his age. Hell, I remember being him at his age. Strange how different childhood looks from this side of the timeline. Everything seems so important when you are 8. Everything seems so fleeting when you're 73. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months left. 6 months to relive the childhood I barely remember living the first time around. Is it selfish of me to want this? To use my last working time machine for something so personal? Maybe. But when you're facing the end, you realize that all those grand adventures and scientific achievements don't matter nearly as much as the simple moment when your mother kissed your scraped knee and made everything better. I dropped the journal like it was made of plutonium. This wasn't just time travel. This was temporal suicide. Harold Winters wasn't his real name because Harold Winters didn't exist yet. This was Tommy Mitchell, 73 years old, dying of some terminal illness, and using his final months to say goodbye to the childhood he'd forgotten in the rush of living. The implications were staggering. According to every theory of temporal mechanics I'd ever studied, this kind of interaction should be impossible. Meeting your younger self was supposed to create paradoxes that would tear reality apart. But somehow, this old man was managing to exist in the same timeline as his younger self without causing the universe to implode, that I spent the next few days trying to figure out how he was pulling it off. The answer, when I finally found it, was both ingenious and heartbreaking. Harold had somehow figured out how to limit his temporal footprint. He wasn't trying to change anything. He wasn't giving his younger self winning lottery numbers or warning him about future disasters. He was just watching, experiencing, saying goodbye to a life he'd lived but never truly appreciated until it was almost over. The old man was dying, and he was spending his final months learning how to be a child again. But here's where things get complicated because they always do in this business. Harold wasn't the only time traveler on this street. My scanner had picked up multiple temporal signatures, and I was beginning to suspect that Tommy Mitchell was going to become someone very important in the future. Important enough that other people might want to interfere with his timeline. On day 21 my surveillance, they showed up 0.3 figures in dark suits, moving with the kind of precise coordination that screamed government death squad in 12 different languages. They had that look about them, the kind of cold professionalism that comes from doing terrible things in the name of the greater good. My scanner went crazy when they appeared, registering temporal signatures that were somehow different from Harold's. These weren't nostalgic time travelers on a personal journey. These were hunters, and they were here for the old man that I watched from my hiding spot as they approached Harold's house with military precision. The lead agent, a woman with silver hair and eyes like frozen nitrogen, knocked on the door with the kind of patience that suggested she had all the time in the world, which, considering the circumstances, she probably did. Harold answered the door like he'd been expecting them. Maybe he had been. When you're playing with time travel, you learn to expect the unexpected, especially when that unexpected comes wearing government-issued tactical gear. Mr. Mitchell, the woman said, and Harold's face went white as printer paper. We need to talk. That's when I realized this wasn't just about an old man reliving his childhood. This was about Tommy Mitchell's future, and apparently, that future was important enough to kill for. The temporal agents pushed their way into Harold's house. and I could see them through the window, having what looked like a very intense conversation. Harold was gesturing frantically, probably trying to explain why he'd broken about a dozen temporal regulations to come back and watch his younger self build cardboard rocket ships. Meanwhile, across the street, 8-year-old Tommy was in his backyard, completely oblivious to the fact that his future self was currently being interrogated by time cops. The kid was playing with a toy spaceship, making whooshing sounds as he flew it around in elaborate aerial battles. It was the kind of innocent joy that made you remember why life was worth living in the first place. That's when the temporal agents made their move. I saw one of them pull out what looked like a standard issue chronoblaster, the kind of weapon that could erase someone from the timeline without leaving so much as a temporal shadow. They weren't here to arrest Harold Winters. They were here to execute Tommy Mitchell before he could become whoever he was destined to become. And that's when this bounty hunter decided to do something completely stupid and utterly heroic. I kicked down my front door and sprinted across the street, my own weapons drawn and ready for what was about to become the most important firefight of my career. Because whatever Tommy Mitchell was going to become in the future, he deserved the chance to become it. And Harold, dying old man or not, deserved the chance to say goodbye to the child he used to be. The first shot shattered Harold's living room window and nearly took my head off. Apparently, temporal agents don't appreciate interference from freelance bounty hunters. Who knew? Tommy, I shouted across the yard, diving behind a decorative flower bed that provided about as much cover as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. Get inside. Now. The kid looked up from his spaceship game, confusion written all over his face. He'd probably never seen a real gunfight before, especially not one involving weapons that could rewrite history with every shot fired. That's when Harold burst out his house, moving faster than any 73-year-old man had a right to move. He scooped up his younger self and dove behind the family car, just as another chronoblaster shot vaporized the spot where Tommy had been standing. "You can't change what's already written," the lead agent shouted, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from speaking for cosmic forces beyond mortal understanding. "The timeline must be preserved." Harold's response was short, sweet, and completely unprintable in polite company. And that's where things got really interesting, because young Tommy Mitchell, 8 years old and scared out of his mind, looked up at the old man who just saved his life and said something that made everyone freeze in their tracks. "Grandpa Harold? Why do you look so much like Daddy?" The temporal agents stopped shooting. Harold's face went white as a supernova, and I realized that this case was about to become a lot more complicated than I'd bargained for. Because sometimes the universe has a sense of humor so twisted that it makes professional comedians weep with envy. And sometimes, just sometimes, a dying old man's final wish is important enough to rewrite the rules of time itself. The question was, would any of us live long enough to see how this story ended? The silence stretched across that suburban battlefield like a taut wire ready to snap. Tommy's innocent words hung in the air like a death sentence, and I could practically hear the universe holding its breath. 3 temporal agents with enough firepower to erase a small moon. One dying old man clutching his younger self. And me, a bounty hunter who'd just realized he was standing in the middle of the most dangerous paradox in galactic history. "Nobody move," the lead agent whispered, her chronoblaster still trained on Harold. "The boy has made contact. Protocol 7 is now in effect." Protocol 7? I'd heard whispers about that in the darker corners of the temporal enforcement community. It was the nuclear option, the kind of classification that made hardened time cops wake up screaming. If they were invoking Protocol 7, then Tommy Mitchell wasn't just important to the future. He was the future that Harold's grip tightened on his younger self, and I could see the determination burning in his eyes. This wasn't just an old man protecting a child anymore. This was a man who'd lived an entire lifetime and finally understood what was worth dying for. "Listen to me very carefully," Harold said to Tommy, his voice steady despite the weapons pointed at them. "Do you remember the story I told you about the brave astronaut who had to choose between saving his ship or saving his crew?" Tommy nodded, tears streaming down his face, but his attention focused completely on the old man. Smart kid. Even at 8 years old, he understood that something monumentally important was happening. What did the astronaut choose? Harold asked gently. He saved his crew, Tommy whispered. Because heroes don't leave people behind. That's right, Harold smiled. And for a moment, the 73-year-old man looked exactly like the 8-year-old boy he used to be. Now, I need you to be that brave astronaut. Can you do that for me? The lead agent's finger tightened on her weapon's trigger. Enough. The contamination is spreading. Authorization Omega Black confirmed. That's when I realized they weren't just here to kill Harold. They were here to erase Tommy from existence entirely, wiping him from the timeline so completely that he would never have existed at all. Whatever this kid was destined to become, it scared the temporal authorities enough to commit genocide against a single person's entire life. Wait, I shouted, stepping out from behind my flower bed cover with my hands raised. Before you vaporize everyone, don't you want to know why I'm here? The silver-haired agent swiveled her weapon toward me, but her eyes remained calculating rather than hostile. Korg Voss, half-breed, bounty hunter. Your reputation precedes you. What's your interest in this temporal violation? I was tracking a different fugitive when I stumbled into this mess, I said, which was technically true. But now I'm curious. What makes Tommy Mitchell so dangerous that you are willing to risk a Class A paradox to eliminate him? Classified beyond your clearance level, she replied coldly. Come on, I pressed, taking a careful step closer. You are about to commit temporal murder. The least you could do is tell us why. What does this kid grow up to do? Invent faster-than-light travel? Cure cancer? Staat an Galactic war. Harold's laugh was bitter and filled with decades of regret. None of those things. He becomes something much more dangerous to people like them. He becomes proof that humans don't need their permission to reach for the stars. The agent's expression flickered, just for a moment, and I caught a glimpse of something that might have been fear. Thomas Mitchell develops the first successful human-operated temporal drive in 2157. His technology makes human time travel completely independent of Galactic Temporal Authority oversight. He essentially breaks their monopoly on temporal regulation. And that's worth murdering a child for. I asked, genuinely shocked. The Temporal Accords of 2089 specifically prohibit unsupervised human temporal experimentation. The second agent spoke up, his voice carrying the kind of bureaucratic certainty that had probably justified countless atrocities throughout history. Humanity's reckless approach to timeline manipulation poses a significant threat to universal stability. Harold snorted with derision. Translation, they're terrified that humans might actually be good at something they consider their exclusive domain. Can't have the upstart species playing with the big kids' toys, can we? That's when it clicked. This wasn't about temporal stability or universal safety. This was about control. The Galactic Temporal Authority had spent millennia positioning themselves as the sole arbiters of time travel technology. The idea that a single human could develop independent temporal capabilities threatened their entire power structure. But there was something else, something that made my bounty hunter instinct scream danger. The way Harold was holding Tommy, the protective desperation in his posture, the fact that he'd risked everything to come back and spend time with his younger self. This wasn't just about saying goodbye to childhood. You are not dying of natural causes, are you? I asked Harold quietly. His face went ashen. They tried to stop me in 2160. Assassination attempt disguised as a laboratory accident. I survived, barely, but the radiation poisoning gave me maybe a year to live. I used my prototype temporal drive to come back here to the last time I remember being truly happy. And now they have followed you back to finish the job. I concluded. The lead agent's chronoblaster hummed with increasing energy charge. Thomas Mitchell must not be allowed to develop temporal technology. The timeline must be preserved at all costs. Whose timeline? Harold demanded, his voice rising with 40 years of suppressed anger. Yours? The one where humanity remains a minor species, dependent on alien technology for everything beyond basic spaceflight? The one where we never get to explore our own potential because you are too frightened of what we might become. Tommy looked up at Harold with wide, confused eyes. Are you really me when I grow up? The question hit like a photon torpedo to the heart. Harold's carefully constructed emotional barriers crumbled, and I watched a lifetime of regret and love and desperate hope play across his weathered features. "Yes," he whispered, "I'm you 70 years from now, and I came back to tell you something very important." "What?" Tommy asked, with the absolute trust that only children can possess. That no matter what anyone tells you, no matter how many people say it's impossible or dangerous or wrong, never stop reaching for the stars. Never stop believing that humans can do anything we set our minds to. And never, ever let anyone convince you that we need permission to be extraordinary. The temporal agents exchanged glances, and I could see them making the calculation. The paradox was already in motion. Tommy had made contact with his future self. The timeline was compromised beyond repair. There was only one way to fix it now: complete erasure. All three agents raised their weapons simultaneously, and I knew we had maybe 3 seconds before they fired. 3 seconds to either accept the end or do something monumentally stupid that I chose monumentally stupid. "Tommy," I shouted, pulling out my own temporal disruptor. "Remember what your older self said about brave astronauts." The kid didn't hesitate. He broke free from Harold's protective embrace and ran, not away from the danger, but straight toward it. The agents tracking him with their weapons, fingers tightening on triggers. That's when Harold did something that violated every law of temporal physics I'd ever studied. He stepped directly into the path of 3 chronoblaster beams, arms spread wide, shielding his younger self with his own body. The beams hit him simultaneously, and instead of simply erasing him from existence, something incredible happened. The temporal energy coursed through Harold's dying body and reflected back toward the agents, creating a feedback loop that sent waves of chronoton radiation rippling through the entire neighborhood. Time hiccuped. For a moment that lasted eternity, I could see every possible timeline simultaneously. Versions where Tommy became a scientist, a soldier, a teacher, a father. Timelines where humanity spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and others where we never made it past our own solar system. Realities where the Galactic Temporal Authority ruled with absolute power, and others where they'd never existed at all. But in every single timeline, in every possible variation of reality, one thing remained constant. Humans never stopped trying. We never stopped reaching. We never stopped believing that impossible was just another word for not yet invented. When the temporal storm cleared, the 3 agents were gone. Not dead, not erased, just elsewhere. Scattered across time like leaves in a hurricane, probably spending the next few centuries trying to find their way back to their own timeline. Harold was on his knees in the middle of the street, his body flickering between solid and transparent like a dying hologram. The temporal feedback had accelerated his condition, but there was peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Tommy knelt beside his older self, taking Harold's fading hand in his small fingers. "Are you going to be okay?" Harold smiled, and for a moment, he looked like the child he'd once been and the man he'd always been meant to be. "Better than okay, kiddo. I got to see you again. I got to remember what it felt like to believe that anything was possible. Will I really become a scientist who travels through time?" Tommy asked. "Only if you want to," Harold replied, his voice growing fainter. "That's the beautiful thing about time, Tommy. It's not fixed. It's not predetermined. Every moment is a choice, and every choice creates new possibilities. The future isn't something that happens to you. It's something you make." Harold's body began to fade completely, the temporal paradox finally claiming him. But as he disappeared, he left behind something that no amount of temporal manipulation could erase: hope. Tommy stood up, looking at the spot where his older self had vanished, and I could see something changing in his eyes. The curiosity was still there, but now it was tempered with purpose. This 8-year-old boy had just learned that the future wasn't written in stone, that humans could be extraordinary if they chose to be, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with the simple refusal to give up. "Mr. Voss," Tommy asked, turning to me with that unsettling intelligence that some kids possess, "are there really aliens out there who don't want humans to explore space?" I looked down at this kid who would either grow up to revolutionize time travel or live a completely ordinary life, depending on the choices he made from this moment forward. The temporal authority might return someday, or they might not. The timeline was fluid now, full of possibilities that hadn't existed an hour ago. "Yeah, kid," I said, holstering my weapon. "There are. But there are also aliens like me who think humans are pretty amazing just the way you are. The trick is learning to tell the difference." Tommy nodded solemnly, processing this information with the gravity it deserved. Then, with a resilience that only children possess, he brightened up completely. "Want to see my rocket ship?" he asked, pointing toward the cardboard construction in his backyard. "I'm going to make it better now. I'm going to make it fly to the stars." I followed him to the backyard, watching as he began enthusiastically explaining his plans for improved rocket design. As I listened to his excited chatter about propulsion systems and navigation computers, I realized that Harold had accomplished something far more important than just saying goodbye to his childhood. He'd given his younger self permission to dream big. 3 weeks later, I was preparing to leave Earth when I received a message on my secure communication channel. No sender identification, no temporal signature, but I knew who it was from. The Galactic Temporal Authority has been disbanded pending investigation into unauthorized timeline manipulation. New regulations are being developed with human input. The future is wide open now. Thank you. A friend across time. I smiled, powering up my ship for departure. Tommy Mitchell might grow up to become the greatest temporal scientist in human history, or he might become a teacher, or a carpenter, or anything else he chose to be. The beauty was that now it was truly his choice to make. As I lifted off from Earth's surface, I caught one last glimpse of Tommy in his backyard, still working on that cardboard rocket ship. But now he wasn't just playing, he was planning. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space and time, the universe held its breath in anticipation of what humanity would reach for next. But that's not where this story really ends, because the universe has a habit of keeping secrets until the very last moment. 6 months after I left Earth, I was tracking a smuggler through the Andromeda Gateway when my temporal scanner picked up another familiar signature. Not Harold this time, but something equally impossible. I followed the readings to a small trading station orbiting a dying star, and what I found there made me question everything I thought I knew about time, destiny, and the Mitchell family. There, sitting in a dingy cantina nursing what looked like Regellian whiskey, was a woman who bore an unmistakable resemblance to young Tommy. Same eyes, same stubborn jawline, same aura of quiet determination that seemed to run in the Mitchell bloodline. But this woman was older, maybe in her 40s, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd seen the far edges of the galaxy and lived to tell about it. "You must be Korek Voss," she said without looking up from her drink. "I have been waiting for you." I sat down across from her, keeping my hand near my weapon out of habit. "And you are?" "Dr. Rebecca Mitchell, Tommy's daughter. Though I suppose that makes me Harold's granddaughter too, in the most twisted family tree in galactic history." She finally looked up, and I saw intelligence there that could have powered a small star system. "I need your help. Let me guess," I said, signaling the bartender for something strong. "More temporal agents trying to rewrite history?" Rebecca's laugh was bitter. "Worse. The Temporal Authority might be disbanded, but there are other organizations out there who aren't happy about humanity's newfound independence. They have decided that if they can't control our timeline, they will eliminate us from it entirely." She pulled out a holographic projector and activated it with a gesture. The image that appeared made my blood freeze. It was Earth, but not the Earth I'd left 6 months ago. This was Earth in flames, continents scarred by weapons that could crack planets, oceans boiling under alien bombardment. "This is what happens in Timeline Beta 7, Rebecca continued. 3 years from now, a coalition of 12 species declares war on humanity. They claim we are too dangerous to be allowed to develop freely. By 2091, human civilization is extinct." "How do you know this?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. "Because I built a temporal viewing device based on my father's notes. I have been watching potential futures, trying to find a way to prevent human extinction. And what I have discovered is that Harold's sacrifice didn't just save one timeline. It created a quantum cascade effect that's generating hundreds of possible futures simultaneously. The implications hit me like a meteor strike. The universe is trying to stabilize itself after the paradox. Exactly. And in most of the timelines, humanity doesn't survive the backlash. We are seen as too unpredictable, too dangerous, too likely to upset the cosmic balance. Rebecca deactivated the hologram and leaned forward. But there's one timeline where we not only survive, but thrive, where humans become the mediators between species, the ones who help maintain peace across the galaxy. What makes that timeline different? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. In that timeline, 8-year-old Tommy Mitchell gets proper training, not just in science, but in diplomacy, strategy, and understanding alien cultures. He grows up to become not just a time traveler, but a bridge between species. The first human to sit on the Galactic Council as an equal, not a junior member. And you want me to help make that happen? Rebecca nodded. I've been traveling through time for the past year, gathering allies, preparing for what's coming. The war fleets are already mobilizing in several sectors. We have maybe 18 months before they reach Earth. I stared at this woman who'd inherited her family's gift for making the impossible seem inevitable. What exactly are you proposing? A temporal intervention on a scale that's never been attempted before. We're going to recruit help from across time itself. Past, present, and future humans working together to ensure our species' survival. That's insane, I said. The paradox potential alone could tear reality apart. Maybe, or maybe it will prove what my grandfather suspected all along. That humans aren't bound by the same rules as everyone else. That when we're faced with extinction, we don't just fight back. We rewrite the rules entirely. Before I could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the station. My temporal scanner was going absolutely berserk, registering signatures I'd never seen before. Through the cantina's transparent aluminum windows, I could see ships materializing out of temporal vortexes. Dozens of them from different eras, all converging on our location. You already started recruiting, didn't you? I asked Rebecca. She smiled. And for a moment, she looked exactly like her 8-year-old father planning his next cardboard rocket adventure. 3 days ago, I sent a message across time to every human who's ever dreamed of reaching the stars. Turns out, when you tell people their species is about to be wiped out, they're surprisingly willing to help. The first ship to dock was a sleek vessel I recognized as a 22nd century design. The second looked like it had been built in someone's garage using spare parts and pure determination. The third was so advanced, I couldn't even identify its propulsion system. How many? I asked. So far, about 300 ships from across 12 different centuries. Scientists, soldiers, explorers, rebels, and a few people who are probably completely insane but too stubborn to give up. Rebecca stood up, downing the rest of her drink. The question is, are you in? I looked out at the growing fleet of temporal refugees, humans from across time who'd left everything behind to fight for their species' future. Some of them probably came from timelines where Earth had already fallen. Others might be from futures, so bright they made our current problems look trivial. But they were all here, ready to do something monumentally stupid and utterly heroic. What's the plan? I asked that Rebecca's grin could have powered a fusion reactor. We're going to do what humans do best. We're going to take an impossible situation and make it worse until it becomes possible again. 2 hours later, I was standing in the command center of Rebecca's flagship, surrounded by humans from across the timeline. There was Captain Maria Santos from 2156, whose crew had been fighting a losing war against temporal invaders. Dr. James Park from 2203, who'd invented defensive shields that could deflect chronoblaster fire. Lieutenant Commander Alex Rivera from 2089, just 3 years in our future, who'd witnessed the first alien attacks on human colonies. And in the center of it all was Rebecca Mitchell, coordinating a military operation that spanned centuries and defied every law of temporal physics ever written. The enemy coalition has 17 different species, she was explaining to the assembled commanders, each with their own preferred method of warfare. The Zephyrians favor orbital bombardment. The Nexus Collective uses quantum disruptors that can phase entire fleets out of existence. The Dominion of Keth prefers biological weapons that target specific genetic markers. How do we fight an enemy that diverse? Captain Santos asked. We don't fight them, Rebecca replied. We convince them that destroying humanity would be the biggest mistake in galactic history. Dr. Park raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do we do that? Rebecca activated another holographic display, this one showing a complex temporal map with nodes and connections spanning thousands of years. We show them what happens when humans are allowed to reach their full potential. Every timeline where humanity survives and thrives, we become the glue that holds galactic civilization together. We become the species that prevents wars, explores dangerous sectors other races won't touch, and solves problems that have stumped galactic scientists for millennia. And if they don't believe us? Lieutenant Commander Rivera asked. Rebecca's smile turned predatory. Then we demonstrated. We are going to execute the most audacious temporal operation in galactic history. We're going to save the galaxy before it needs saving, prevent wars before they start, and make ourselves so indispensable that attacking humanity becomes unthinkable. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. What she was proposing wasn't just time travel. It was temporal warfare on a scale that could reshape the entire galaxy. The first target is the Regellian Civil War of 2094, Rebecca continued. In the original timeline, it lasts 14 years and claims over 2 billion lives. Human negotiators end it in 6 months with a peace treaty that lasts for centuries. What about the Temporal Accords? Dr. Park protested. This level of intervention is forbidden. The Temporal Accords were written by the same people who wanted to prevent humans from developing time travel in the first place, Rebecca replied coldly. Besides, they disbanded their enforcement agency. As far as I'm concerned, we are operating in uncharted legal territory. Over the next 6 hours, Rebecca outlined an operation that was equal parts brilliant and terrifying. Human operatives would be inserted into dozens of historical flashpoints across the galaxy, not to change major events, but to nudge them in directions that highlighted humanity's unique value. We'd prevent disasters, broker peace deals, solve scientific mysteries, and generally make ourselves so useful that the idea of wiping us out would seem not just morally wrong, but strategically insane. It was the kind of plan that could only be conceived by someone who'd inherited Tommy Mitchell's gift for turning impossible problems into revolutionary solutions. There's one more thing, Rebecca said as the briefing wound down. The operation has to be completed before young Tommy turns 9. That's when the timeline cascade effect reaches critical mass. After that, the future becomes fixed, and whatever reality emerges will be permanent. How long do we have? I asked. Rebecca checked her temporal chronometer. 4 months, 2 weeks, 3 days, and approximately 7 hours. The room erupted in controlled chaos as commanders began coordinating with their respective time periods, establishing communication protocols, and preparing for the most complex military operation in human history. I found myself standing next to Rebecca as the crowd dispersed, both of us looking out at the temporal fleet that had assembled in response to her call. You know, this could backfire spectacularly, I told her. Temporal paradoxes, quantum cascades, reality storms. We could accidentally erase ourselves from existence. We could, she agreed. Or we could prove that humans aren't just another species struggling to survive in a hostile galaxy. We could prove that we're the species that makes survival possible for everyone else. As if summoned by her words, my communication device chimed with an incoming message. The sender was listed as T. Mitchell, age 8, Terra Standard Date December 15th, 2087. I opened the message, and Tommy's excited voice filled the command center. Mr. Voss, I finished my rocket ship. It's really good now. I added navigation systems and everything. Mom says I can't test fly it until Dad gets home, but I wanted you to know I'm going to be an astronaut someday, just like we talked about. I'm going to visit all the stars and meet all the aliens and show them that humans can be friends with everyone. Thanks for believing in me. The message ended And I realized that every person in that command center had stopped what they were doing to listen. Here was the voice of the child they were all fighting to protect, the 8-year-old boy whose future would determine the fate of human civilization. Rebecca wiped a tear from her eye. "That's my dad," she said quietly, still believing that anything is possible. "It is possible," I replied, surprised by my own certainty. "Because he's right. Humans can be friends with everyone. We just have to prove it." Rebecca nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "Then let's get to work. We have a galaxy to save, a species to preserve, and a little boy's dreams to make come true." The operation began at 0800 hours, Galactic Standard Time, with the largest coordinated temporal deployment in recorded history. Across dozens of timelines and hundreds of critical moments, human operatives began the delicate work of reshaping galactic history not through force, but through the simple demonstration of human potential. And somewhere in suburban New Denver, 8-year-old Tommy Mitchell was in his backyard, testing the aerodynamics of his improved cardboard rocket ship, completely unaware that the fate of every human who would ever live depended on his continued belief that the stars were within reach. The universe held its breath and waited to see what impossible thing humanity would accomplish next.